If I could have your attention, please. If I could have your attention. I hope you're all enjoying your lunch. But we're going to get on with our program and get this wrapped up. Our next speaker is going to talk about a legislative issue, among other things. She's also going to talk about her organization. The issue is something that is a bill that's been introduced in the legislature and is pending that will deregulate certain types of solar projects that we think will have an adverse effect on utilities and on their customers and on investors. And Kristin Gilkes, our next speaker, will talk about that in some detail. It's also in your legislative report, which is the back part of your packet. At the end of that, it suggests that it would be a good thing for you to take a moment to write an email or a letter to your legislator telling him to oppose this bill. We haven't asked you to do that for a long time, but I think on this one it would be important. So take a look at all that material and listen to what Kristin has to say and see what you think. With that, I want to introduce Kristin Gilkes, who is the Executive Director of the Customers First Coalition. Kristin was formerly with Alliant Energy, where she served as the Manager of Public Affairs. Prior to that, she was at the Public Service Commission as Communications Director. And prior to that, worked in the legislature for Representative Phil Montgomery, who chaired the Energy and Utilities Committee. Kristin is a graduate of the UW-Madison. And with that, here she is.
Thank you, Jim. And it's nice to be with all of you again. When I was at Alliant Energy, I did sit on the panel several years, the legislative panel. So I'm familiar with your group and your organization, and I appreciate the invite to speak to all of you today. I did not get a tutorial on the slide deck. Let's see. Okay, there we go. So the Customers First Coalition is a group that was founded over 20 years ago at this point. I don't know if some of you may have been working in the industry or remember when Wisconsin was deeply engaged in conversations to restructure the electric industry. And when I say restructuring, some people refer to that as deregulation or retail choice. Basically, it's a system under which customers would be allowed to choose an alternate provider. The utility companies would still own the lines, but you could choose your own generation provider under retail choice. When Wisconsin was considering this, like I said, it was in the late 90s, Customers First Coalition came together with a diverse set of interests to say that any restructuring of the utility industry should protect customers first, and you'll hear that in a video I have on Customers First, so you can watch that while you're eating. Nice little relaxing video. So it's about 4 minutes long and just does a little bit more history on Customers First for you.
The electric industry is complex and rapidly changing. That's why more than 20 years The electric industry is complex and rapidly changing. That's why more than 20 years ago, as the state of Wisconsin considered restructuring the electric industry, members of the Customers First Coalition came together to help protect the interests of all customers. These days, Customers First continues its mission to help educate policymakers and unite industry stakeholders. Our efforts ensure customers are considered first when new laws or regulations are discussed.
One of the most helpful things for any legislator is to have good, solid education about issues before them. We've been at the table, we've tried to influence policy in a broad, nonpartisan way, and I think we've been very successful at that.
Our founding members include electricity providers, consumer organizations, renewable energy groups, and utility workers. Together, we work to preserve Wisconsin's reliable and affordable electricity and encourage a robust dialogue on energy issues.
The strength of our coalition is in our diversity and the breadth of interests that we bring to the table.
In addition to our Power Breakfast and Dialogue events, Customers First educates policymakers and the public through regular communications. We also weigh in on critical issues before the legislature and regulators.
For CUB, what Customers First does is provide us with an opportunity to have a dialogue with other utilities and other organizations in the energy sector so that we can have a chance for collaboration and not just be at odds all the time.
Customers First, protecting the interests of Wisconsin electric customers of all sizes, prioritizing and safeguarding energy reliability, supporting affordable electric service at stable prices over the long term, and steadfast in our mission that any restructuring of the electric utility industry should benefit consumers first.
All of those things involve the regulatory model, and they all involve decision-making by legislators and regulators to decide as we move forward what kind of changes do we need to accommodate those interests of customers. Technology, for example, has really in the last decade or so changed the electric industry, and we think that'll bring a lot of change.
It's more important than ever to think critically about the energy we use and customers' changing expectations of their energy providers. Customers First will continue to bring industry leaders and customers together as we shape Wisconsin's energy future.
All right, thanks for watching. Hopefully that was a bit of an introduction. I should mention, I'll list off our members. We have 8 core founding members that comprise our coalition. So we have the Municipal Electric Utilities of Wisconsin. We have WPPI Energy, which is a wholesale energy provider to those municipal utilities. We have Dairyland Power Cooperative, which is a generation and transmission co-op that provides power to the electric co-ops. The electric co-ops are also part of our organization. Our only investor-owned utility member is Madison Gas and Electric. And then we also have the IBEW 2150, so labor is represented in our coalition, the Citizens Utility Board, as you saw in the video, and then Renew Wisconsin is also part of our organization. So when I say it's a diverse set of interests in the energy industry, I really mean that. So when our board comes together on something, you can understand that it reflects a wide range of interests. I wanted to start us out and just give you an overview. We mentioned in the video that Customers First Coalition holds power breakfast, power lunch events. We typically hold in-person events, sort of like this, where people can come together, hear from legislators, regulators, major energy stakeholders. But the pandemic has definitely changed the way we do some of our education and outreach. We now have a monthly podcast, which is a lot easier to figure out than you would ever imagine. I am not a tech-savvy person, but one day everyone was talking about podcasts. I just went on my phone and found where you can search for podcasts and listen. And so I will help anyone who has questions about how to do that afterwards if you're interested. But I just find I can listen in the car or listen when I'm folding laundry. And there's some really good information that we can get out this way. And so some of our recent episodes have dealt with solar panel recycling, community solar, utility regulation, coal plant closures, electric vehicles. And we really try to get a diverse set of interests to talk about all these issues, because when I'm talking to people like you, or when I'm talking to legislators, I get the questions. I get the questions that the legislative panel get every day, and so I want to provide answers for those from trusted sources. So that's our goal, and the electric wire I'll reference several times probably in this presentation, just because we've done episodes on some of these topics. So there's basically three topics I wanted to mention today. One is just why we support effective utility regulation. The second, as Jim mentioned, is a community solar bill that's recently been introduced that we believe poses a threat to the utility regulatory model. And then the third topic, I was just going to touch quickly on electric vehicles, because customers first in our diverse set of interests, we have been a supporter of smart and effective electric vehicle policies. And I have also been an electric vehicle driver for 4 years. So I'm here to just offer, to answer any questions you may have remaining on electric vehicles as well. So first, our support for effective regulation. Customers first, like I said, we were founded to support the regulated electric energy market, and we believe any changes should be evaluated closely and make sure that they don't impact customers negatively. Some of the benefits of local regulated utilities, just that local in-state investment, customers being served from providers with ties in-state who have been in the community for over 100 years in many cases. It offers superior consumer protection and rate stability over the long term. When I talk about retail choice or deregulation, so sort of loosening some of those regulations on utilities like MG&E or WEC Energy Group, in states who have gone to a retail choice model where customers can pick and choose who they want to purchase power from, there's 13 states who have gone to a deregulated model. And in those states, you typically see customers overpaying for power from what they would have paid by sticking with the incumbent utility. And there's so much more potential for scams that way. Illinois' Attorney General, and previous Attorney General, made this sort of her mission and settled lawsuits with, I think, 7 alternate energy suppliers for targeting low-income neighborhoods or disadvantaged populations with scams. And so consumer protection issues are really a huge part of the problem with deregulation. Another problem is a less stable power supply. So if you've got people coming in to offer energy from alternate suppliers, one of the things that happens is there's not an incentive to maintain existing generation infrastructure. So there's not as much incentive to put those upfront capital costs into maintaining a reliable supply. So what happens then is they can shave off as much as they can from their costs in the short term, but then in the long term, it's less reliable power. So you get a situation like what happened in Texas. There's widespread power outages, and then now they're bailing out the electric providers with taxpayer money, and rates will go up in the long term. And customers who had chosen alternate suppliers were getting bills for like $13,000 for keeping their power during the storms. So when I say a less stable power supply and less reliable prices, like that's an example there. Cherry picking favored customers. What happens under retail choice is the alternate suppliers will often go after the larger customers to get those large accounts and offer a discount to industrial or other large customers, and that leaves everyone else with fewer choices and higher costs. And then I think I mentioned deceptive marketing practices already, and it's something that we deal with already. You know what I mean? People get scammed already, and moving to a less regulated model would lead to even more deceptive marketing. I mentioned the cost for residential customers. Industrial customers, in many cases could potentially make a case for deregulation just because they're usually the ones that benefit. I think in Wisconsin we've tried to strike a good balance of offering new load pricing for larger companies. We want to make sure their load stays here. We want to make sure the jobs stay here. But we also need to make sure that all other customers are protected when we're offering those type of programs. I mentioned Illinois earlier. The Illinois Commerce Commission actually was doing some studies, and customers who signed up with alternate suppliers paid $100 more per year on average than they would have if they had stayed with the incumbent utility, and that totaled over $100 million annually, collectively from all those customers. So one of the issues that people might raise is, if we want to offer more choices and that'll mean lower rates, it's not a 1 + 1 = 2 equation. If you want to address a rates issue, there's other ways to do that besides going the route of deregulation. So that leads me to where we are today. Because Customers First was really founded on that issue, we look at legislation through the lens of how does this impact the regulatory model. And so Jim mentioned the community solar legislation that's before the legislature right now. I want to touch on that in just a second, but I also want to preface that by saying the Customers First Coalition has been a long-standing supporter of community solar projects. Back in 2017, we issued a report on community solar and highlighted some of the successful community solar projects that were starting to be developed in the state. I think the first community solar project from Northern States Power, XL Energy, was proposed in 2015. Madison Gas and Electric had a community solar program, their shared solar program that Matt Spencer mentioned. That came on in 2016, 2017 timeframe. So these are projects that have been around for a while, but they are still relatively new. But this model is something we can support when it sort of insulates all other non-participating customers from absorbing additional costs of the program. So if you want to see more solar, if people want opportunities to invest in solar energy, if they can't put it on their roof, or they have a shaded rooftop, or they live in a apartment building, we still want them to have access to those opportunities, but we think the way that the projects are structured is really important. I mentioned the podcast. We did a podcast episode on this in May. We had Commissioner Ellen Nowak, who I'm sure you have heard from before. We had Deb Irwin from XL Energy talking about their experience with community solar in Minnesota. And so I think that was an important episode, an important conversation, just sort of set the stage on what type of community solar projects work within Wisconsin's regulatory model. And so like I said, while we support properly structured community solar projects, the Customers First Coalition Board of Directors has voted to oppose Senate Bill 490 for some of the following reasons. And just a bit more background on Senate Bill 490, which I apologize, I didn't look at what was in your handout, but it's been proposed by conservative lawmakers from southeast Wisconsin, and so that's sort of something new, right? A lot of times you don't see legislation on renewable energy coming from the right side of the aisle, but they're saying this proposal is a way to get at the issue from a conservative model. I, having a background working in Republican politics, would slightly disagree with that, because the legislation they're proposing, basically what it does is it still on? Okay, so basically what it does is says unregulated facilities can come in, build a community solar project, and then the incumbent utility, the local utility, would have to offer bill credits back to any of their customers who choose to subscribe in this unregulated facility. The way that they are able to turn a profit on those projects is by asking the Public Service Commission to set a rate for that buyback rate that results in, quote, robust community solar development. So the rate, the buyback rate, is not specified in the legislation, but because this is a similar model to what has been happening in Minnesota since 2013, we know that the rate in Minnesota that they set was a very favorable rate for solar development, more than the utility could buy solar from elsewhere. So in Minnesota, XL Energy customers are actually paying, I think it's between $50 to $100 more on their bill today if they're not a subscriber, because of the investments in community solar, then they could be paying if the utility just bought that solar power elsewhere. So community solar has turned out to be a very expensive prospect there just because of that buyback rate. And so not only do you have unregulated entities effectively selling power to utility customers, the unregulated entities are also doing it risk-free because utilities would be required to purchase any unsubscribed shares of these facilities. So essentially, you can get these out-of-state and international investors coming in saying, we're gonna put in these facilities, we're gonna try to get a couple subscribers. If it remains not fully subscribed, then the utility has to pay them back a retail rate for the rest of that energy, and it ends up going on the backs of all other customers. In Minnesota, what they've seen is the subscribers to these community solar facilities end up being largely corporations who are looking to offset their power bill. They're only 13% residential subscribers. Yet, like I mentioned, the average residential subscribers are the one paying more for their power now because of these facilities. I always like to say, I mean, people ask, like, why are they doing this? Why would they be doing this? I mean, the intention is to spur renewable energy development across the state, right? That's the goal, and it is accomplishing that goal. It's doing it, though, at rates that are not fair to other customers. And, I think you all heard from the legislative panel, utilities in Wisconsin are making some pretty significant investments in renewable energy as it is, and when they do that, they're able to do it at a utility scale, get the lowest cost, and the benefits extend to all customers in that situation. So that, like I said, those are some of our major concerns with the legislation. I'm just trying to look at all the different things we had here. Additionally, I mentioned our concerns with consumer protections from unregulated entities. That includes these providers. There's not a way to ensure that they're not keeping more of the profit than they should, that they're extending all of the bill credits back to their subscribers. There's a lot of room for error. Additionally, what they found in Minnesota is that even though there's a limit on the size of each of these small facilities, they will group them all together, and that can mean large-scale facilities being built without utility involvement. So that could create some large costs if they're putting it at places on the grid that don't make the most sense. You know what I mean? If there's new transmission infrastructure needed then to serve it, it can cause some confusion and some problems. Let's back up. Are there any questions on the community solar piece?
Yeah, you mentioned a lot of times it's operations and outsiders. In the specific to the Wisconsin situation, any idea who is behind this in this state?
That is a great question. There's a group called the Coalition for Community Solar Access. There's also there's a couple other groups. That's the one that I remember off the top of my head. I think they are funded by national interests. In Minnesota, they mentioned that Warren Buffett owns over 50% of the facilities there. So it's typically those really large investors.
Perhaps some hedge funds or whatever, but they're
Right.
kind of shadowed under these other things like the coalition.
Right.
So is there
Yes.
a third-party role here?
So the proposal would essentially allow for large third-party owners to be coming in and selling electricity. Yes. Oh, sorry. Yes, I will do that. Yes. So the gentleman in front here asked, does this sort of deal with third-party ownership statutes here in Wisconsin? And the answer essentially is it would be making it legal for third parties to come in and engage in this larger scale subscription model. There is separate legislation dealing with those sort of like smaller third-party ownership projects. You know, if someone wants to put solar panels on their roof and then have someone else finance that, we're not taking a position on that specific bill. I think your organization may, but I'm really focused on sort of the larger scale deregulatory aspects of this community solar legislation. All right, I'll just go, this is like my last slide on some of the electric vehicle advocacy that we've done. I believe, maybe it was Matt Spencer that mentioned, electric vehicles can benefit all utility customers. I firmly believe that when charging is managed appropriately, you're making the best use of the existing utility assets. So when people get home at night, they charge their car overnight, and you can set it so it doesn't start charging until an off-peak time, like 11 p.m. And so you're basically using the existing resources in a more efficient way, which can lead to lower costs for all customers. We've advocated before the legislature and the commission in the past on this. We have a couple podcast episodes where we brought in a representative from the Citizens Utility Board and others from the utilities just to talk more about what are some of the implications for all customers on electric vehicles. We did just do our most recent episode with a representative from Lucid Motors, and that addressed some of the reuse and recycling concerns for EV batteries. One of my goals, I think I said with the podcast, is when I get questions, I want to help people find answers to them. And so that recycling of solar panels, recycling of electric vehicle batteries, and recycling of wind turbine blades, those are all questions I get asked regularly. So we've spent like 3 episodes working on those topics to help really get to a place of understanding about what happens with these new technologies after their useful life. So I think with that, I'll just open it up to any other questions about any of those topics. All right, thank you. Thank you so much. Oh, go ahead. Thanks. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Kristin, thank you. Appreciate that. It was very, very helpful. As I said, there's a document at your place, or that if you haven't picked it up, they're over on the sideboard there, that explains these issues in further detail, and we'll be getting some more information out to everybody as to how to participate or potentially communicate with your legislators on the so-called community solar bill. With that, I'm going to turn it over to the folks from the Circus World Museum for a little update on what we might expect when we go across the street. Thank you.
Hey everybody, good afternoon. My name is Scott O'Donnell. I'm the director of Circus World, which is directly on the other side of that brick wall to the back of you. It's our absolute pleasure to welcome you to Baraboo today, and absolute pleasure to welcome you to Circus World. You are sitting in one of the only 2 Ringling buildings in town that are not part of the Circus World collection. This is the former Ringling Brothers Ringling Brothers shop. In this space, 15 wagons used to be parked, and they used to paint them in this space. It was also a building that held the wardrobe department and the electric department. A lot of the buildings in the Ringling collection, not only here, but across the way. If you wonder where the floor is, it's up on the ceiling in most of the buildings. As they put concrete down on the floor, the wood from the floor went up to the ceiling. The Ringling Brothers, this was their hometown. They started their circus here in 1884, and they were here until 1918. And as fate would have it, it was the last global pandemic that was one of the causes for them to leave their hometown of Baraboo. They had purchased their biggest competitors, which was the Barnum and Bailey Circus. just a year prior to the Spanish flu outbreak, which happened in 1917. So they found themselves with the two biggest circuses in America at a time when public health and wartime efforts were making finding enough workers a challenge. So they decided to combine those shows into Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus in 1918, and they left Baraboo almost overnight to head to the Barnum and Bailey winter quarters, which was based in Bridgeport, Connecticut. After spending a couple of winters there, they realized that the winters there were just as awful as they were here in Baraboo, and they set their sights on someplace warmer, and they moved to the Sarasota, Florida area, where they remained, or the circus brand itself remained, until they ceased operations in 2017. We are a state of Wisconsin historic site. We're one of 12 that are part of the Wisconsin Historical Society. We are 64 acres. Don't let that number scare you, like how are we gonna see all that? Our main campus right across the street is just over 30 acres. Then we have another 20-plus acre parcel that's about 3 blocks away, which houses the National Historic Landmark Ringling Brothers Train Shed. It's a 600-foot long, 3 sidings on the inside and a full-size circus train parked on the inside. Across the way, you're going to find 8 National Historic Landmark buildings. The one directly across the street, I was enjoying listening to the electric car conversation, because the original horsepower of the Ringlings was right across the street. They started off by horse-drawn wagons, and over 600 baggage horses were part of their fleet. That's 600 Percherons, Belgians, big horses, as you might imagine, and the baggage horse barn is the first building right across the street. Those wagons that those horses pulled, you will see in our collection. I encourage you to visit the Wagon Pavilion, which is up on the hill. It has the largest collection of circus wagons still in existence anywhere in the world. We have over 260 wagons that are part of our collection. Those 260 wagons represent 97% of the circus wagons that that are still in existence, but those represent only 3% of circus wagons that were ever built. During the wartime efforts, particularly, fields full of wagons were burnt in order to get the metal elements off of those wagons to put to wartime's efforts. But we are absolutely honored to have those wagons that are part of our collection. We have a wagon restoration shop right next door. If you take a peek in there, you'll see what our talented team of artisans are working on next. Gold leaf and painting and wood carving, and it's just absolutely amazing, the artistry that they do. When you get across the street, for those of you that feel comfortable enough staying parked where you are, it's literally 1 block down the street to our main entrance. You will identify yourselves when you get there, and you will get crossed off of the list that I was just given. For those that might have ADA challenges, there is handicap parking down closer to the main door on Water Street, which is the street right out in front. We also have 4 wheelchairs that are available there for anybody that might need that for navigating our grounds. Again, it's a pleasure to have you here. When I was a little kid, I was voracious about everything about circus. I'm from Canada originally. My oots and the boots gave me away. I've DA'd myself. I'm very proud of that. But I read all these books, and every book talked about Baraboo. And as a kid, I couldn't say it. I called it Baruba. And I kept telling my parents, I got to get to Baruba. And being a Canadian, it sounded like an island. So they were all for it. It was like, yeah, let's get to Baruba. So I wasn't born into the circus industry like so many of my friends and colleagues are, who are 5th-generation human cannonballists or 9th-generation elephant trainers. I was the quirky kid from Canada that fell in love with the circus, and I predate the creepy clown phenomenon that has overtaken the world. Thank you, Stephen King. I thought if you could make people laugh and get paid for it, that would be the best job in the world. So that's what I wanted to do. I got a degree in Russian history, a minor in political science and psychology, and I ran away and joined the circus, which really made my parents proud, as you might imagine. We paid for 4 years of college, and you're going to do what? But 30 plus years later, they realize it's not a phase, it's not a fad, and it's my honor to be here in Baraboo, and now I know how to say it, at the original winter quarters, to walk and work in the very buildings that those 5 brothers from this little landlocked town built, dreamt, conceived, and exported to the world, the greatest show on earth. I mean, it's absolutely amazing. They started with their first tent where our post office is here today, and it sat 400 people. And within less than a decade, their circus tent had grown to the size of seating 12,000 people per show, and it moved every single day. The logistics of that are staggering. It's like erecting a modern-day arena and then tearing it down and moving it overnight. It's why the United States Department of Defense comes and studies the circus prior to World War I to learn how to move massive amounts of equipment and how to feed massive amounts of people. It's an operation that brings about 1,700 people in staff and performers to your town, so it's really a city that comes to your city. They had their own fire department, their own post office, their own doctor that traveled along with the circus. And they really had some pretty amazing innovations. One year, their big attraction was electricity. It was the first time that lots of rural communities had looked up and seen the wonder that was the light bulb for the very first time. They also had recorded sound. They also had moving imagery. They had automobiles, what they build as flying machines, which we know as airplanes now. Air conditioning first goes across America in circus tents, albeit big wagons with big blocks of ice and fans and ductwork, and unless you were sitting right underneath it, you might not have noticed the difference. But they had it. It was always about finding the latest technology and the latest culture and the latest animal, and whatever it was, something that you've never seen before and more that came to your community. And that's what I hope that you enjoy when you visit us across the street. Over 100 circuses have come from the state of Wisconsin. It's unequal to any other state in the nation. From state line to state line, if you throw a dart at the map, you'll probably land on a town where a circus came from. It's that heritage that we honor at Circus World right across the street. With that, I invite you all to use the restrooms if you want, and make your way down to the main entrance at Circus World. Be our guest, explore it, step into the world of the circus, and don't forget that phrase, children of all ages. It's really true. Connect to that child inside, because there's so much wonder that we can all celebrate, and we hope you do that right across the street with us. Thank you, everybody. It's our pleasure to have you with us.
All right, folks, that was a wonderful introduction to the rest of the afternoon. But before we break up, we do want to have our drawing. We have quite a few prizes today, so you'll have to bear with us as we go through this. And is Roger going to help me with this? Roger's going to pick them out for us. Okay, the first one is 5 shares of Alliant Energy stock. And the lucky winner is Bill Stebbins. There you go. And we're going to put the little sheet of paper that has your name on it on top of your gift right up here. Our next prize is an Excel Energy gift basket, and the winner of that is John Balson. John, are you here somewhere? Oh, there we go. All right. Okay, and our next prize is a squirrel-proof bird feeder. And for that, it's Carol Carlson. There we go. All right, it's right up here. And now we have 2 large mums, so we'll have 2 separate winners for that. The first is Sandy Grosnick. And the second is Marilyn Decker. I think a Deacon, sorry, I didn't catch the last letter in that one. Now we have 10 small mums, so there's 10 winners here. Jane O'Leary. And you could just take it right from the table you're sitting at, or another table if there isn't one there. Matthew Holzman. Karen Cronenberg. All right. There's one right on your table. David Schmidt. There you go. I guess you don't have one on your table, but we'll get one for you. Jim Schutpelz. Jim might have left. Charlene Drescher. It's handwriting again.
Yeah, that's right.
Drescher. Darlene, still here? There we go.
Yep, she's over the corner.
Very good. And Jerry Peplinski. Very good. How many do we got? 6. Okay. All right, and here is Kay Fletcher Thistlethwaite. Something like that. Perry Holzman. Oh, great. And Clifford Carlson. There we go. So that should be it for the small mums. And then 2 more items. We have a harvest basket. And that is Henry Russell. There he is. And lastly, an MG&E stadium blanket. Juanita Harbert. There you go. All right. So all but the small mums, the items are up here, and you can come up and pick them up. Your name should be right on it. Well, that concludes our program for today, and I appreciate you all making the effort to come out. I know the COVID thing is still among us and has to be dealt with, but it's good to see all your faces, and we hope you have a good afternoon over at the museum and safe travels home. Thank you.